Not an action item.
Well, if an action item, if we get to that, we can circle back. So it's a pretty ambitious agenda. So if it's okay with everyone, we'll get started. We'll call the meeting to order. My name is Larry Snow, one of the co-chairs of the State Land Authority Board for the Point of the Mountain. And Governor-elect Cox is the other co-chair, but I think you can all appreciate he may be able to join us, but he's heavily involved in preparing transition, and so he may be on and off again, and we certainly excuse him. And even though he's not on with us, I extend on behalf of myself and I think the board our congratulations to him, and also Lieutenant Governor-elect Senator Henderson. So moving on with the agenda, I also want to acknowledge the board members that are with us. Thank you for joining, and thank you for your engagement. We welcome also those who are guests invited, and also members of the public. This is a public meeting, and members of the public are invited to be here and also to comment. There is a tremendous amount of activity underway right now with the board, and you're going to hear about a lot of it today. We are right in the middle of, those of you who are involved know this, right in the middle of selecting the planning team and also building our organizational structure. We're looking at their proposals, and Alan will be able to bring us up to date on that, but that's exciting because, as we've said, this is the process that, as Alan reminds us, puts pen to paper. And that may be a little bit downstream before we see that, but this is the beginning phases of it. So I just want to say many of you have been involved in the working groups, in the reviewing of those proposals, in making some presentations, and sincere thanks. This board is not a passive role board. It requires active engagement, and so I just want you to know that I appreciate that work on your behalf. And I also want you to know that I believe the citizens appreciate the level of expertise that we're trying to develop in our work, and that we're paying attention to the details. So thank you. The next item on our agenda is recognizing public comment. As I mentioned at the outset, this is a public meeting. Public comments are invited, subject to the rules that have been established by the board. Sometimes it's hard when I'm chairing to know whether we have members of the public attending, but if there are, we are streaming and live, and we appreciate your interest. And you are free to make a comment. And in order for me to recognize you, I need to have you speak up or maybe wave your hand or something. And with that, we'll turn the time to the public if there is someone there that would like to comment on our work. If you'd speak up. Not hearing anyone speak and not seeing any hand signals, we'll move forward. The next item on our agenda does require official action. Alan, are we there with a quorum?
We just hit 6, so yes, we've got a quorum.
Very good. So the next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our October 13th meeting. And we appreciate Cece getting those minutes out timely. Each of us have received a copy and reviewed them, and I would entertain a motion from one of the board members, please.
This is Dave, so moved.
Thank you, David, for that motion. The motion is that we approve the minutes of our October 13th meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second it, Jim Russell.
Thank you, Jim. It's been seconded. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Not hearing any opposed, and with the quorum, I'll rule that that motion passes unanimously, and the motion, the minutes are approved. So, Cece, I just realized I didn't do something. Are you still with us? I think,
Yeah. The determination, the meeting determination.
yeah. Is it too late? Am I fired now, or can I still do that?
Go ahead.
Okay. The law requires that when we conduct meetings this way, that I read, or one of the chairs read, a meeting determination. So bear with me. You've heard this before. You can check your messages for a minute. No, I'm only kidding. So this is what it says. I, Larry Snow, co-chairman of the Point of the Mountain Land Authority Board, have determined that the November 10th, 2020 meeting of the board will be held electronically without an anchor location. This determination is based on the following facts. Number one, Utah is currently dealing with COVID-19, which has been determined to be a pandemic. COVID-19 is extremely contagious and can be deadly to those who contract it, especially those of advanced age and underlying health conditions. Number two, the agency offices are in Salt Lake County, which is currently in the state's yellow risk category. This limits the size of public gatherings to fewer than 50 and requires the wearing of masks and social distancing. People are encouraged to stay in their homes. Three, a vast majority of agency staff and the members of the board are teleworking to avoid unnecessary contact with others. Four, the boardroom is insufficient to allow social distancing and reasonable safe accommodations of the board and the public. Five, the board uses an electronic platform which allows interested parties to view the meeting, hear discussions, and provide written comment. I executed that determination last Friday, so it's dated the 6th day of November 2020, signed by myself. So with that, I think we meet hopefully the procedures required under the law, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. That being number 4, approval of proposed fee schedule. You will recall in our last meeting that this board authorized by motion that our director, Alan, prepare a proposed schedule. And Alan can comment on this, but I think this is also a requirement of law that we adopt a schedule. And so with that, I'd like to turn the time to Alan to explain what he's done in that regard.
Thank you, Representative Snow. And yes, as we discussed last time, we determined that it was good practice to have a fee schedule, and more than good practice, it's something that we need to do if we're going to charge for time spent responding to government records requests and the like. I took your input from the last meeting, drafted a proposed fee schedule based largely on what GOED and other state agencies have done, tailored it to our needs. And I held a public hearing on October 28th to gather any public input on the schedule. We had one member of the public that joined, but really just wanted to listen in, and when it was quiet for a few minutes left. So we did not get any public comment. I'm going to share with you my screen. This is the fee schedule as outlined, and we're really just establishing fees for a handful of items. Some of these are just pretty obvious. It's odd size photocopies at 50 cents a page, 8.5 by 11 photocopies at 25 cents a page. If we have to certify documents, $2 per. Cost for faxing at 50 cents, long distance document faxing at $2. And again, these are just based on what other agencies of the state charge for those kinds of things. The other portion of this is really based on time. So Again, if somebody were to ask us for government records, we're able to charge for the time that is involved in compiling and preparing and shipping those records. State law says that the amount charged can be no more than the hourly rate of the lowest paid employee that can competently respond to these requests. I guess I'd say that since I'm the only employee, we don't have any competent employees able to do that. But we thought that using my hourly rate was probably too high relative to what most agencies charge, but didn't want to also lose a lot of money if I have to spend significant time responding to government records requests. So the compromise was to charge $40 an hour for any time that I spend going through documents and trying to collect documents to respond to those requests. So that is less than the hourly rate, but also wanted to be mindful of the public policy behind this, that people be able to get government records without an exorbitant cost. There is an opportunity that if those records are being sought for a public purpose, that we can waive the fee and we don't charge for the first 15 minutes of looking. But that's those are the fees that we propose. It's important that we have these in place, so if somebody does request any of our documents, copies, certification, etc., that we have an objective amount to charge. So I think I'll leave it at that unless there are questions.
Any questions of Alan about the fee structure? I know when Alan and I briefly discussed this, his work here, we mentioned that the time may come when he has, or the authority has, staff members who may be able to conduct some of these activities for a lesser rate, and in that event, we may revisit these. But right now, it's just Alan, and that isn't bad, but that's the reality of the situation. Any questions for Alan? So let me remind the board that this matter is on the agenda for action. And I think Alan and the chair would be, well, Alan would be helped by an approval of this fee schedule. So the chair would entertain a motion to that effect.
Mr. Chair, this is Troy Walker. I move that we approve this fee schedule as presented.
Thank you, Troy. The motion is that we approve the fee schedule as presented. Do I have a second to the motion?
I'll second. This is April.
Thank you, April, for the second. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Anyone care to comment on that motion? Not seeing any indication, we'll place the matter for a vote. All in favor of motion to approve the fee schedule?
Aye.
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 Thank you. I don't know whether I got cut off there, but that was a motion in favor to approve the fee schedule. Are there any opposed? Not seeing any indication or hearing any no votes, the chair will rule that passed unanimously. Thank you very much, Alan, for your presentation and for the board approving that work. The next matter on the agenda relates to historical issue. I think, as most of you are aware, that some members of the public are very interested in having some historical elements of the state prison at the Point be preserved. In fact, this topic has received some media attention. We welcome Dr. David Amat of the Preservation Utah, and David, I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's with us today, and he contacted our director, Alan, and asked for the opportunity to share some thoughts on that issue related to historical preservation. Before we turn the time to you, Dr. Amat, I'd like to ask Alan, if you don't mind, to bring us up to date and provide some background, and then we'll turn the time to Dr. Amat.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, and this is not a new issue. A little over a year ago, the Draper Historic Preservation Commission invited me to one of their meetings and discussed the importance of historical preservation and some opportunities that might be available on this site. In follow-up to that, we took some of their materials. We've also done some independent research on what other projects around the country have done with former prison sites and other institutional buildings. And just as an example, the Liberty Hotel in Boston was a former jail and is now like a 4-star hotel. There's a development called Liberty Lorton in Northern Virginia that has converted former jail and prison cells into condominiums and townhomes that are selling well. We also know that there are many in kind of the high-tech industry that like quirky spaces and repurposed buildings. But it's also important, I think, that you know that when we did the site survey last spring, Horrocks engineers also looked at historical buildings on the site and mapped those buildings, categorized them based on their historical value. And we have shared all of that information with the firms that are competing to develop our master plan. Some of them have raised the question independently about what we would do with those facilities on the site. So we do have the information, we've shared it, and we're encouraging our planning teams to consider that as they start developing their proposals over the next couple of weeks. So that's just a little overview of where we've been on this topic.
Thanks, Alan. And with that, Dr. Mott, we'll turn the time to you.
Thank you so much all for your time. I'm going to, I guess, ask the question that launches so many presentations this year. Can everyone hear me? Am I coming through loud and clear? Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Well, thank you all. Good to know. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. I know that you're very busy, and so I will try to keep my presentation as brief as possible. And in many ways, that's possible because Alan touched on some of the points I wanted to make and some of the examples I wanted to show. I do have a little PowerPoint that I'm going to try to present. And I just have to figure out how to do this because I am more familiar with Zoom than I am with Google Meets. Let's see, Alan, do you need to give me permission to show the?
I'll look and see. I'm pretty sure you can, but I'll look
I'm
and
not
see.
sure the PowerPoint works. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
didn't.
Could be
Okay,
the format.
I don't think videos are that work, but you can try.
okay,
Yeah,
well,
I think you have access to share your screen.
So David, if you go down to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you should see an icon that says Present Now.
right. And
So click on that. It'll
And it
pull up
says-
us.
okay, there we go. There we
Click
go.
on the screenshot and yeah, there you go.
That's easy enough. Okay, can everyone see the PowerPoint now?
We can see it, David.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, let me just launch into the presentation. Actually, perhaps what I should do is introduce the organization I represent. Many of you are familiar with Preservation Utah, formerly the Utah Heritage Foundation. For those of you who are not, Preservation Utah was founded back in 1966 by Governor Calvin Rampton and First Lady of Utah, Lucy Beth Rampton, to, in the words of First Lady Rampton, exchange hand-wringing for organized effort in terms of historic preservation. And I'd like to think that for the last 54 years, we've been doing just that. The presentation will be brief, but I do love outlines. I'm going to just start out with a little bit of historic context, address the question, why is the prison worth saving? What could it become? Again, showing a lot of the examples that Alan just mentioned, and then conclusions, how to support preservation, and then we can open up for questions, if there are any. I'm just going to start out by talking about the territorial prison that was built in Sugar House starting in 1855 through 1875. This is a building that grew over several decades. Whenever I show this building to really anybody, they always say, what a great prison, what an amazing building. I mean, it doesn't look like a prison as much as it looks like a mansion on Bellevue Avenue in Rhode Island, or some other place where elites gathered in the Gilded Age. Utah was very proud of this prison. This image actually comes from a postcard that was published in around 1890. And so we were proud enough to even feature this building on postcards that were sent around the nation, sent around the world. Speed up to the late 1940s, the prison looks tired. The prison looks old. It is tired. It is old. And it no longer really functions as much, as well as it once did as a prison. The pride that Utahns once felt in this building by the 1940s is completely gone. And in fact, there are several articles published in the Desert News, the Salt Lake Tribune, that call the prison a time bomb. And I like this article from 1949, the Desert News. It has Governor Lee, then Governor Lee, commenting, when Governor Lee said the Sugar House prison was a disgrace to the state, he was whitewashing it. It is worse than a disgrace, and that is all there is to it. And consequently, the prison is torn down. The main cell blocks are demolished. The main building where the prison marshal lived for a time was used as practice for firemen to extinguish flames out of buildings. And that is ultimately how this central feature of the prison is taken out. And nobody cries. As we see here, the Desert News article from October 14th, 1951, no tears shed, ancient prison being leveled. Into the limbo of obsolescence, Sugar House prison fades away. We find ourselves currently at a similar juncture where we have the opportunity to save the prison. But I think, like in the 1950s, this idea isn't largely understood, or why we would save the prison is comprehended. This is an ugly building to many people that only represents oppression. It represents the worst elements of society in the minds of many. So why on earth would we want to save it? Why I have concluded this building is worth saving is due to a lot of the historiography that has been written about prisons over the last several decades, starting with the theoretician Michel Foucault's The Birth of the Prison, which is an important book, a seminal book published in 1975. What Michel Foucault argues is that prisons really are at the root of the structure of society. In many ways, they, since the 16th, 17th, 18th century, since the birth of the modern nation state, has helped to structure society. And in that way, they are similar to buildings that represent all of society, like the State Capitol building. The State Capitol building represents all of us, and that idea is even embodied in the structure of the building itself. The dome, for example, is a comprehensive symbol of all of society gathering together to make laws that will then leave Capitol Hill and structure society. And what is interesting about prisons, other institutions of this ilk, is this represents then those laws taking physical shape, being embodied literally in glass and steel and brick and in concrete. And one of the things I regret about the prison in Sugar House, which, as this article, again, the headline of the article suggests, is that this faded into oblivion, and the lessons that this building had to teach us about who we are as a society, how society was structured, were for the most part lost. I don't know any historian or article or publication that has really delved into this building, what it meant, how it represented all of us, not just the people inside of it, but all of us as supporters of the society in which we all participate. And that is the primary reason why I think saving the prison in Draper would be of great import, because this is in a profound way a building that does represent all of us, just as the Capitol building and other government buildings represent all of us, the collective whole coming together to create structures for society. What the building could become, there are many prisons that have become museums. Our neighbor to the north in Idaho turned their territorial prison into a fantastic museum. I would argue an even better experience is offered in downtown Philadelphia through the Eastern State Penitentiary. But I think the museumification of the Draper site isn't necessarily what is going to float. I think this prison has the potential to pay for itself through redevelopment, adaptive reuse. This is the hotel that Alan mentioned, the famous Liberty Hotel, a 4-star Marriott in downtown Boston. This is another compelling site that Alan mentioned. This is the Lorton Reformatory. Here are some pictures of the outside. This is, as Alan suggested, selling very well. The appeal of this building is tremendous. Here we have a series of cell blocks that will, as it says here, probably become a grocery store. Here we have a prison yard that is now a child's pool area and play area. We have exciting adaptive reuse projects here taking place in the state. Here's one great example. I know many of you are familiar with the Monarch, a former parking garage from the 1920s, I believe, now even being used for receptions, wedding receptions. It's an office space, a creative space. And then, of course, we also have, and we were able to show our friends in Draper this building on a tour, buildings in the granary area of Salt Lake that are being transformed into really exciting spaces. This is industry. They're on, I believe, 5th. Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
We can
Yes.
still hear you.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I heard someone say David, and I wasn't quite sure if there was a question or a problem with the reception.
No, we can still hear you. Thank you.
Okay, this is a super exciting space where they basically have carved up this large vacuous space into, I don't know what else to call these but cells, and I don't mean to put a pun on it, but there are smaller spaces that are being tremendously successful even in the pandemic. I talked to the person who transformed this former still site into this industry. And I said, why on earth did you do it? What made it worth it? And she said, well, it was more expensive to reuse this old building than to just scrape the site and build new. But the product that we ended up with is so much more compelling, is so much more endurable, and we think will be a fantastic asset to the community moving forward. I just want to end with this note. This is something that I encountered when I toured Twitter, which is a company that employs my brother-in-law. It was with my brother-in-law. Twitter took this design center in downtown, sort of the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, and transformed it into their headquarters. And inside the headquarters, they've added more historic buildings. They have, for example, a series of cabins, which were imported from, these are 19th century cabins imported from, I believe it's Wyoming or Montana. So you have layer and layer and layer of history. And I said to my brother-in-law, why on earth did Twitter do this? Why did they take one ramshackle building and make it their office and also incorporate these other historic buildings? And my brother-in-law said, I love meeting in this area because I am planning the future, which can sometimes be scary. It can make me feel a little insecure. It can make people wonder, what are we doing and how will this impact society long term? And as we answer these questions, as we address these questions, it's wonderful to have elements of the past surround us because it provides us a sense of security and a sense of the tangible and the real and something that humans have already experienced, which then can launch these future efforts. In the interest of time, I don't want to go too much into this slide. I'll just say a few words. A lot of people say that the Draper prison is ugly, and in many ways, I think that that is an asset that it has. As this quote says, great cities are made by buildings that aren't necessarily all that iconic, but that work together, that aren't trying to steal the show. And that's a big problem with modern cities, especially huge areas that are redeveloped into a city out of nothing, tabula rasa, into the center of an urban spaces. This type of architecture is now popularly called fast casual architecture. And the problem is all these buildings are trying to compete with each other. They are trying to steal the show. And in many ways, the ending result is that there is no there there. To quote Gertrude Stein, there is not a sense of anything in the past. There's not a sense of the palimpsest that people tend to like. In a city that grows more organically, you have that, as opposed to everything new all at once, all happening, all trying to compete for the attention that the passerby has to offer. In terms of conclusions, how to support preservation, I'm thrilled to hear that you have consulted with the planning firms about saving some of these buildings. And when I say some of these buildings, I'm really just talking about the historic core of the prison from 1945 to about 1955. The preservation community would love to hear any and all of you vocalize support, potentially allow these buildings to get on the National Register. The National Register does not prevent demolition. A building listed on the National Register can be painted flamingo pink, could be made into a skyscraper, could be shot off to the moon. But it is a recognition of the historic value of these buildings. And it sounds like you're already working with planners to determine the policy, the design of this space, and how it might incorporate preservation. And I really appreciate and applaud those efforts, speaking as a representative of the preservation community here locally. I thank you for your time. Of course, whatever time is left, I'm happy to answer any questions this presentation may have generated. If there are any, I'll entertain them. Otherwise, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation. From the board members, questions for Dr. Amat?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you, David. That's very interesting. I've always thought, well, we ought to have an homage to the prison somehow, but you provided us with a much broader vision, and I guess it will come down to how it could be structured financially. I mean, it would be, I think, pretty cool that if part of that was a some kind of a hotel in the future, but I think it has to come down to, so many things we have yet to determine. But you've done a lot of study on this. I guess my question is, do you really think those buildings are worth preserving, and at what cost?
I appreciate the question. If you think of Sugar House Park, a wonderful space like that, if there's anything that could have improved that park, it would have been to keep some of what was there in the prison standing. I don't think that anyone would doubt that now, even though, of course, that was an issue of great discussion back in the 1950s when that building was ultimately demolished. As far as costs go, I think there are developers who would absolutely take it on, especially if you opened the possibility of the building's redevelopment nationally. I think that the tax credits that could come after the building is placed on the National Register could help that. Those of you who are familiar with tax credits know that, for projects that are listed on the National Register, there are federal tax credits available that are up to 20% of the total cost of the reformation, the restoration of the building. And the nice thing about when developers use those tax credits is they can make modifications to the building, but within certain standards that preserve the integrity of the building. So I think doing that would help. There are all sorts of companies, I deal with them on a regular basis, that use tax credits as the basis of their business model.
Yeah.
And I think there are several developers even here locally, and many of them have even expressed as much to me that would be thrilled to take a crack at the project. And if I can further clarify, I would only ask that these buildings be preserved if we are able to find a developer to do that work. I would not want this bill to fall to the state to cover.
Something to think about. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. Other questions for Dr. Amat? I don't hear anyone speaking up or waving their hand, Doctor. So we'll again express our appreciation for your presentation and for your time. A great presentation, and it's something that the board will, I think, continue to look at and take into consideration.
And let me just take the opportunity to thank you again, all of you, for your service. You're doing a great service for the current crop of Utah residents and generations to come.
Thank you, David. We'll turn next to the item on the agenda, number 6, report of the working groups. I think all of the board members know that one of the things that we did a number of months ago was recognize that there would be great value afforded our efforts if we expanded our reach to engage government leaders, business leaders, and members of academia to assist us in developing our vision. And under Alan's tremendous direction, those groups were established and have been undertaking work for several months. Their work now has been boiled down into some reports, or a report, over 200 pages. I had a chance to go through it, and no one could look at that report without recognizing somewhat the amount of energy and effort that has gone into this, which have been tremendous. And I know some of you have chaired some of those working groups, have been involved with it, and it's a great and important process. So, Alan, that's kind of an introduction. We'll turn the time to you to talk about, update us on the working groups and the report.
Thank you very much. I'll just pull up a copy of the report, and I'm not going to take long. All of you received a copy. It's attached to the agenda for this meeting, so you can go through it at your leisure. It is over 200 pages, but don't be intimidated by that. A lot of that is a summary of the public survey that we did and appendices that include the meeting notes from each of the working group meetings. I think the real meat of it is just about 7 or 8 pages, and we give a little background of the site, of the board, and the guiding principles that you've adopted. And we give some background on the working groups, who they are, and what their purpose is. Then summarized what happened at the meetings each month and what we had asked them to do. And then this is the real heart of it. So if you don't have much time but want to get a sense for what leaders in our community are thinking with respect to this site, it's really on pages 7 through 14 of the report. The stakeholder working group, which was composed of elected officials, talked about their vision for economic development, the development itself. We've got the education, research, and innovation working group. See, there's a lot of overlap that all of these groups want a great place that would attract talent, that would be fun to visit, fun place to work. Talked about higher education and the types of sectors that we ought to target for this area. Some discussion about programming at the site, which means, what kind of after-school programs would we have, lectures, competitions, things that would generate interest and get talented people interacting with each other to promote this innovation ecosystem. The Environment and Air Quality Working Group came up with a range of ideas for how we can address that legislative mandate that we improve air quality through transportation and building construction. Looked at water quality, reducing energy use, another directive from the legislation. And the Infrastructure and Land Use Group talked a lot about the urban design, how we can minimize parking, create a connected street system that will facilitate movement and walkability, green infrastructure, working on transportation and with surrounding communities. And then our economic development group had a similar vision to what the others have said, a regional destination, place of great lifestyle that will attract people to the site. The need for an innovation presence that combines industry and academia, and the recruitment strategy. So I'm not gonna go into it in more detail than that. You can look at it if you want, but I just want to emphasize the effort that's gone into this project. Our gratitude to those of you on the board who've served as chairs of these groups and kept things moving. And then I finally want to say the work's not done just because we have this report. This was designed to capture ideas generated to date so that we could share them with the finalists in our planning process. And it was clear when we interviewed the final teams last week that they had spent some time working through this report and understanding what the leadership and the public here in the community are looking for at this site. And we will be involving the working groups further as we start the master planning process, and at various stages, the successful planning firm will bring information before them for input and ideas. So we've got a ways to go, but this was an important step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but we began our work saying that this would be a public process. And this is certainly part of it. And the posting of this report is part of our obligation to be transparent. The public can view that report and they can also appreciate the level of expertise that's gone into it. Thanks for your leadership on that, Alan. Let's go on to the next item on the agenda, which is somewhat related. Muriel, we're going to be turning some time to you in just a minute to talk about the public surveys, our outreach to the public generally. During the months of September and part of October, there was an outreach really generated by Muriel and her team to obtain public comments, and I understand that we received somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 different responses, which is pretty remarkable given that period of time, and also remarkable given in some ways the narrowness of this particular subject matter. But it certainly speaks to the fact that those who did weigh in have a real interest in what the outcome of the point will be. So with that, Muriel, we'll turn the time to you to talk about the process and the results.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Representative. So as Chair Snow mentioned, this survey was launched in conjunction with our press conference on Monday, September 14th. It was a statewide survey, and nearly 3,000 Utahns responded. I think that's just indicative of the generational nature of this project and how vested Utahns feel in it. So we had it open for about a month. It was a statewide survey. We kept it pretty simple, around 5 minutes to take. We find that engagement drops off precipitously after that 5-minute mark. So hopefully all of you had a chance to take it. We dubbed it Make the Point because we were asking Utahns to literally and figuratively help us make the point. So these results have similarly been presented to our planning consultant team finalists, and all of these results have been publicly available on the Point website homepage. So the Salt Lake Tribune, you may have seen this article, covered our survey results, and here's the headline. Utah's old prison site, the public wants parks, transit, and housing. And Tony, I think, really encapsulated kind of the key takeaways just right there in that headline. You'll recall that we structured the survey into 3 main parts, building intentionally on the Point of the Mountain Development Commission's regional visioning process. Utahns, over 4,000, participated during that multi-year process, and we wanted to build on that feedback, not be duplicative. So elements from the preferred scenario developed by the Development Commission were then taken, and we asked the public to elaborate a little bit more for us on a few key aspects of the site. The first was site attributes. So again, these elements that you see here on the slide were elements that were called out in the preferred vision. You know, having regional trail connectivity, parks and open space, a site that's well served by transit, and et cetera. So you'll see here, this slide essentially shows what respondents rated as a 5 on a 1 to 5 Likert scale. You'll see here that parks came in with over 1,500 respondents saying that that was their number 5. And then trails and transit came in as a close second and third, respectively. Connections to regional trail networks, when you dive a little bit deeper into the data, you'll see that on that 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is not at all important and 5 is very important, you know, far and away, this was kind of one of the key takeaways for question number 1. Regional trail networks was a top priority by our respondents. Parks, playgrounds, and open space also ranked very high, and like I say, transit as well. What I thought was really interesting was that restaurants and shops also ranked as very important to respondents. Office space was a little bit more mixed. This could also be due to our current environment where, you know, we're in the middle of a once-in-a-century global pandemic, and there's a lot of conversations occurring about, you know, is this the death of the office? So that may have been top of mind for respondents. Sometimes it's really hard to tell. You'll see, again, the responses were a bit mixed. Usually what we find in fielding surveys is that when someone isn't really clear about how they want to answer on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, they'll rate it as a 3 because that's kind of a neutral selection. Wide variety of housing options, again, pretty mixed. You'll see later on here in these survey results that that is really the case when we dive into the open-ended response that survey respondents gave us. Some folks want affordable housing, others are very worried about density. Entertainment venues also ranked high. I thought this was interesting. University and research presence, similar to office space, kind of there was a mixed result here. I don't think that, you know, as we move forward in considering different development approaches for the Point, that, you know, this input for the public should be seen as, you know, something that's incongruent with, you know, a potential approach there. It's really, I think, hard to decipher, you know, when people look at this question. I think they're largely thinking this is more physical space with university space on the site. And we already have Brigham Young University, Utah Valley University, University of Utah, and so forth that are here in the area. So again, I wouldn't put too much weight on this response. I think when people were looking at that question, they may have thought, you know, this represented additional office space on the site. So of the following choices, what we did essentially was asked respondents to not only rank on that 1 to 5 scale, rate on that 1 to 5 scale, but rank them as well. So, you know, anticipating that would put 5 for a lot of those elements. This part of the question really asked them to rank. So they had it was a forced ranking of all of these selections. You'll see here that people put parks as their number 1. Trails, shops, and transit came in after that. I'll just tick through these really quickly for the sake of time. Regional trail networks Parks, open space, and public transit, again, ranked high. Office space was a lower priority. Housing options was lower. Entertainment and research presence were a bit lower. The second part of the survey was about development objectives. So again, on that 1 to 5 scale, how important were these various development objectives? You'll see again that creation of parks and open space and high quality of life were the most important to our respondents. Again, I'm just going to tick through these really quickly. Okay, and here's where we asked them to essentially rank those same development approaches, and still parks and quality of life came out on top. Of these choices, we asked, what is the most important? Again, you see improvements to air quality, protecting the environment, and enhancing mobility were top. These are just further details of those. Open-ended responses was essentially just kind of a catch-all for our respondents to tell us what they thought. And this word cloud, when you see some words more prominently displayed than others, that is a weighting. So it means that that word was mentioned more often when our team went back and coded those open-ended responses for keywords. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the sentiment was positive or negative. We didn't do sentiment ratings on this. So, again, housing was a word that came out a lot, but again, it was really mixed in terms of those that wanted more affordable housing for the site and those that were concerned about density. Bus, traffic, park, development, all of those kind of came out as keywords. And with that, that's pretty much my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Steve.
Muriel, was there anything in here that you went, oh, that was a real surprise to me. I didn't expect that answer.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question, Representative. I think for me, the fact that parks, open space, and trails were ranked as the highest by respondents, to me was a bit of a surprise. Obviously, those are top priorities, and we're looking at those as well. But I would have thought that high quality jobs, jobs closer to where people live, like those would have been a bit higher. I also felt like, again, the university research presence, while, I'll heavily caveat this with the fact that this wasn't scientifically fielded and people may have had a misperception about that question, that also was surprising to me, that they ranked a university presence so low.
Thank you, Muriel. Other questions for Muriel? Let me just say, this was very comprehensive, very broad effort to collect the data from members of the public, and I'm kind of with you, kind of surprised in some areas. I will say that quality of life and air quality were high ranking in the broader survey that we did for the Point of the Mountain Development Commission. And I remember when those results came out, especially on air quality, that is still remains on people's mind. So very good. Any other final question? Thank you, Muriel. And this work and these survey results are going to help us as we move into the planning phase to incorporate these findings to the extent that we can. So thanks, and with that, we'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 8, the land use program for the Point. We recognize Aaron joining us, Aaron Talkington from our consultant RCLCO, and I have said before, I'll say again, we're fortunate to have this level of expertise. You know that RCLCO has been outlining a land use program for the point based on market analysis. To a large extent, we have to remember that we are developers, and when you're looking at a site like of this size, it wouldn't be prudent to undertake development without a rigorous analysis to determine what product will move and what will sell, and what the good price points are to keep that process going, what the absorption rates are. And so I don't know that I've given you a good introduction there, Aaron, but we'll turn the time to you and let you talk to the board about your work and update us.
Thank you. That's a perfect introduction. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, it's thinking about it, at least on my end. Do you guys have my basic PowerPoint screen now? Yay.
Yes,
okay.
We can see it.
Excellent. So I'm going to share, very high-level overview, consistent with what we shared with the planning teams last week during the initial design trip. A lot of this information is probably going to be familiar for you all, as residents of the region and of the state. But sometimes there's some interesting tidbits in there, that maybe you hadn't thought about since your day-to-day, isn't necessarily thinking about the real estate in the economic development context. Just to give you all a sense of what we're up to and where we are, this is an output of the kind of overall draft market analysis that we worked on and completed in early October. And that really thought through in a variety of scenarios, what the demand potential at the site was, what the absorption rates, what potential home sales were, how much office space there could be, through 2050 could really be a 25 or 30 year development horizon. And we kind of recognize that the site might build out longer than that, and in an amazing scenario, it would build out, might build out faster than that if everything goes, even better than we think it might. But recognizing this is not a site that we're going to build out tomorrow. And so, we use that to put together some site programs to start to inform some financial modeling and, also for a program for the design trip, so that all of the planners that we're working with will be working after the same, set of square feet and ideas that, everybody else is. It'll give us a good basis for comparison. So just to share a little bit of the overview that we shared with them, since most of them are not particularly familiar with the broader Wasatch Front region. We talked a little bit about how quickly, the region is growing, and the need to think about, the region not just as the Salt Lake metro area, but really as 3 metro areas and 4 counties that you are combining to be one of the fastest growing economies in the country. And that while this is quick and maybe the pace is going to slow down a little bit, we really see the growth as sustainable based on a variety of different factors that we don't think are likely to change in the region. And we also talked a little bit about the trend toward mixed-use settings in the region, and the idea that while some of these architects from San Francisco and LA may think that this is a given, right? Their regions have been doing this for multiple decades. The idea that a lot of growth might occur in mixed-use areas is still a little bit newer in the Wasatch Front, and that while there's several other areas that we think are really demonstrating that this region wants mixed use and multiple use environments, there's really an opportunity for the point, partly because development in these areas keeps increasing, and also because all of these areas have the complication of kind of being in existing context, right? They're infilling or they're redeveloping, within small sites and within existing areas that, don't give those areas the opportunity to really think long term about their plans and their intentions the way that we can at this point. And that, we shared a couple of examples of how we've seen, this level of master planning and thoughtfulness translate into some very different development contexts. Really to convey the idea that, we think that mixed use in a master plan context really does have a market opportunity here, and it's probably a market opportunity that, really only the point has a significant opportunity to capitalize on in the short term. The gravel pits, I think, will have a similar opportunity, but, as we heard several months ago from, their representative, it'll be a while before those sites really start to build anything. And so we shared with them the idea of, Mission Bay, which is obviously a very different context from the point, much, closer to downtown San Francisco and with the Bay Area's, real estate dynamics. Lake Nona, which is much more suburban, and in fact, probably was less well located when it first started construction than the point is today. It's a much more suburban context. And the Woodlands, which is really one of the original new towns that began building 40 or 50 years ago, and today is really in infill context, where they are still planning, but their development is mostly mixed use development in their urban core, and they really have a major employment center. And so these are three very different examples that we picked because they're so different, out of all of the different case studies that we've shared with you all in the past. And we also talked a little bit with them about the fact that, the point of the mountain area broadly, is the convergence of several growth patterns that have gone on in the state for a while. And that, it really is a locational asset, for the region and for the state from that perspective. That initially there were really kind of three economic cores in the region, and that, since 2000, we've really seen Salt Lake and Provo grow together in this Point of the Mountain area, and that the share of regional development activity captured there, has been really substantial, especially over the last 10 years. And that while we don't necessarily think that it's going to continue to capture more office development in the future, we think that it can maintain its capture, as long as there's land and sites available, and that, probably increase its capture of some of the other land uses that really serve and enhance, office development, right? Retail and hospitality, as well as multifamily apartments and higher density housing. And that while single family would probably like to continue locating here, that share of development is probably going to go down as the land continues to be more scarce and more expensive. We also took into account just the question of where is there available land, and are there going to be competitors with us in the future? And it's kind of shocking, because I think when we did this in going to get the year wrong, but maybe 2013, let's say, there really was a lot more land in this area, right? There were a lot more significant sites, and I think this is representative of how quickly the Point of the Mountain area has been growing. That there are just not that many total acres. There's less than 1,000 acres of developable land within 500 feet of I-15 at this point. And, most of the sites are small. They're less than 20 acres. And so while you can do a nice small mixed use project on those side sites, it doesn't get to the point we were talking about earlier with some of those case study examples. And so the point really is the logical place in this area for the type of development that we're considering. We shared with them a little bit of the site analysis and how we're thinking of these different uses, which is to say that, today, we were looking at the site purely as a blank slate, and, would somebody want to take a piece of the site and consider building any of these options? The answer is yes, right? Somebody would want to build office, somebody would want to build retail, somebody would want to build hotel, somebody would want to build apartments, and lots of somebodies would want to build single family housing. And so, the question and the hardest question of programming and the planning going forward is not, how to, catalyze market interest. It's how to shape and leverage that market interest to achieve all these other goals that we're talking about. How to be really careful and cautious about, the timing of development, the phasing, the density, and all those considerations we talked about last month in the trade-off discussion, right? Which things are going to be worth sticking our neck out for? And which things do we want to be a little more conservative or a little more, traditional in how we approach them in development. So we shared this program that you can see on the bottom of the slide here as a possible starting point. This is the program in square feet and units that we've asked each of the planning teams to use in their design competition, so that we have a little bit of an apples to apples comparison. And we got there, I think, through just a very high level assessment of if you have 700 acres, you're going to spend a quarter of it probably on roads and infrastructure and and civic uses. We've heard really clearly that parks and open space matter a lot. Maybe, Steve and I decided that maybe another 15% of the land would be a reasonable assumption for now on how that might, be allocated, which leaves you about 420 acres for potential development. And, within that, we gave them a program that we think represents about 300 acres, although we've let the planners have some leeway to tell us that maybe they think it could be on fewer acres, if they so desire. And we've also held about 100 acres for what we call an anchor catalyst use, so that they can share some ideas with us of how, they might really pursue those economic development goals on site. Recognizing that there probably will be some more residential and some more office and more, everything on this list, within that catalyst. But we wanted to give them that flexibility to really play with the remaining piece so we can see their creativity. So I think this was pretty well received by the planners. So obviously a lot of them are used to much higher density concepts, and so all of them wanted to try to push to build taller buildings, to build denser buildings. I think that the program we're showing here represents about 25 to 30 years of build out at the site. So it's not a short-term program, but it's also not a century-long program. And I'll be really interested to see what we get back from the planners. We've given them the opportunity to continue to ask questions if they need to. So with that, I'll turn it back to Representative Snow and to this group if you guys would like to ask any questions.
Thank you, Aaron. Very interesting. Aaron, if I just have a question to start things off a little bit, on this slide, the percentage allocation, at least at this point that we've allocated for parks and open space, 15%. How is that? Is that generous compared to for more private developments? Do you understand my question? Is that about right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's on the generous side. You could certainly be more generous. But if you handed the site to a developer today and said, do what you want with it, you probably get less than that. Steve, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, generous might be a little generous. I would say it's kind of middle of. I would say it's kind of middle of the road. It doesn't represent a major commitment to a open space, a commitment project. I think that would be a larger percentage. I'd say it's a moderate, allocation, leaning towards the generous direction rather than the minimalist direction. I think one of the things we want to do, recognize in this exercise, and Aaron and I have talked about this, and that is that this is not the plan, right? This is a point in time where we're evaluating 3 consultants, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, as I'm next up to talk about that. But this is where we're evaluating 3 consultants to pick one, and then we're going to be embarking on a planning exercise, and in that planning exercise, we are going to, in our scope of work, we ask them to pursue 3 fundamentally different alternatives as a first stage of that process. And those aren't just 3 physical manifestations of a single program. Those 3 alternatives will be varying fairly dramatically in terms of program. And we want to do that because we want to understand, what if we do a major retail component here? What does that do to the traffic? If we want to make a major open space commitment, what does that do to the amount of employment? Does it respond just with higher density, or is there less of it? So we're going to have an opportunity to really have some fun testing various programs, and I think one of those will clearly be, if not more than one, testing the implications of a more aggressive open space, component.
Thank you, Aaron and Steve. That explanation helps a lot, and I think it helps remind us that what we're looking at here is almost part of the test evaluation for our respondents. Other questions?
Aaron and I can debate for an hour on this, as to what
probably longer.
Well, we're fortunate to have expertise from both of you. Other questions for Erin on her presentation?
This is April. I have a question. Do you see
Okay.
that we have any market feasibility or any way to support any high rises? It looks like here the highest you wrote was 6-story office. And then also, as we've talked to the planning firms and figured out this percentage of parks and open space, have we all taken into account some of the protected acres on the west side? That when we did the Alta survey originally, we had talked about that there were some acres that needed protection.
So I'll start with your first couple of questions, and then the protection question may have to be tossed to somebody else. We're looking at some of these, the product types you described here as a starting point, and they really reflect what I would consider market feasibility for a private sector developer who had to purchase their own site. And so we've shared these with the planning teams largely to give them a sense of where the region is today, not to constrain what they might consider on site or how they, how the site might evolve as they, consider the long-term development. And, I think most conversations we had with the planners, almost started with the question of, well, can we build in higher density? And I certainly agree that I think there's going to be, mid-rises and then maybe high rises on the site over the long term. But that's what, we've kind of used some of the market reality today to make sure that, based on where we're starting and where we maybe average out, over this build out, that, we don't unduly burden the site with density in a way that you actually don't get any land value out of it. Because, that's one of the trade-offs we're all going to have to consider going forward is how do we make sure that we actually generate some value out of the site, and how do we use that value? And so I think that's a very open question going forward, but I certainly don't see the door closed on high rise.
If I could add to that a little bit, it's interesting because when we presented this to the consultants, they, I think they all pretty much came back and said, well, why not do higher density? And we said, look, what we want you to do is use this program so we have a base case, going forward as a point of comparison. However, if any or all of you have other ideas about programming and density and so forth, feel free to express those, even at this early stage, going through the charrette process. So I think we're going to hear some other ideas and some pushing on density for sure. The other comment I would make is we have to remember that when we go above 6 stories, the buildings become more expensive, right? There's a different fire code requirement. There's different building types that have to go into higher buildings. And so that's why you see in suburban areas like this, you look around, you see a lot of 5 and 6 story buildings because they get punished if you go to 7 or 8. Until you start going to like 10 or 12 or 15, it's not worth it just adding another couple of stories. And so one of the gauntlets that's going to be tossed down in front of you at some point in the future is going to be, to what degree do we want to sacrifice land value for creating skyline and getting higher density? Because that's probably what it's going to kind of come down to at some point. And we don't have to struggle with that now, but that'll be a point in the future where we have an opportunity to have that discussion.
Thank you, Steve and Erin and April, for your question. Further questions?
So this is April again. So my second question was that land on the west side, it was, it's not like wetland or anything. Was it Native American or what was there was some type of restriction, it seems like, on some acres that we had down there on the west side. And I just want to make sure that we're taking that into account. So maybe that gets built in as part of our open space percentage, but I'm not sure who has a handle on that particular item that we talked about 2 years ago.
Let me take a stab at that, and correct me, Jim, or others if I'm wrong. But as I understand it, we don't have a restriction on the west side of our property. There were some on the other side of Bangor Highway on land owned by the state, because there were some archaeological issues there closer to the river, but those were not on this property. One real constraint that we do have is the easement for the power lines that go through. We've got transmission lines that go through the property, and that's a pretty significant constraint. And at some point, we may need to have discussions about whether we pay to underground those or move those around the site. But yeah, that will constrain what we can do a little bit.
So April is right, though. There is that, and Alan, you alluded to it, on the other side of Bangor there's that strip of property that is a conservation set aside in statute. But we could do, that could be used for parks or something like that, not just, it'd have to be green space or parks or something to that effect. But I don't think we've necessarily talked about that being in part of the development at this point.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks, April. Anything further from the board? Appreciate, Aaron, your presentation, and your presentation and this discussion is a perfect lead-in to the next item on the agenda, which is to obtain an update on the planning process that's been underway. And it has been a very intensive process. We're still right in the middle of it. A special thanks to members of the selection team that have put in a significant amount of time. Some of those from our board, April and Jim Russell, and some really good folks from outside of our board. Christina Oliver is Community Development Director for Draper, and also Wilf Summercorn, who was the former Planning Director for Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County. They have also lent their experience and background and expertise into this process. These interviews, as I understand it, in speaking with Alan, these are not 15-minute interviews. They are extensive, last a fairly long period of time, and they're rigorous. And we anticipate in our December meeting having a recommendation from this evaluation group to select our planner. And without saying a great deal more, we've invited Steve to comment on the process and provide us background and update us as to where we are.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so as was just described, we've gone through several kind of rounds. If you remember, we started with 12 firms. We went through an interview process and reduced it to, we went through a quals review process and reduced it to 6. Then we went through an interview process and went from 6 to 3. And now these 3 are going through a bit of a competitive process. And these are the 3 that did bubble to the top in the interview process and quals process. The first is AECOM, and I put together a couple of slides here just to show you a couple of things that in terms of their quals. AECOM is, these are all big, firms. I mean, AECOM is actually made up of a group of about 30 other firms that were assembled over the last over the last 45 years. There's actually more than 2,000 employees. There's about 30,000 employees. These numbers aren't right. Sorry about that. They're about 30,000 employees, and they have offices in about 100 countries. So it's by far the biggest firm. It's one of the biggest firms in the world in terms of engineering, environmental planning, and architecture. This is the team that presented, and this is just like one of the examples of the projects they presented. And one of their strengths is they have a very strong sort of analytics platform. In fact, I think all of these firms are pretty strong in spatial analytics, which is one of the things that we've been kind of looking for, so that there are more objective criteria in evaluating different alternatives. Perkins and Will is headquartered in Los Angeles. They've been around for 85 years, have 2,300 employees, have 25 offices, mostly in the United States, but also internationally. You know, very strong team, you know, very good sense of good chemistry. And they also have a slightly different type of analytics model, which is fine. It tends to, you know, being an architecture firm, it tends to be less about planning and more about smaller, medium-sized projects. One of the projects that we were impressed with was the Mission Rock project in Mission Bay, San Francisco. It's a very successful project that, and they've been involved in Mission Bay, which is probably one of the granddaddy redevelopment projects in the United States. So anyway, very strong team, and they kind of you know, scored high and obviously impressed the group. SOM is, you know, well, probably the oldest, you know, heritage firm. It's got 1,100 employees. It's got 10 offices. It's what we call a real classic firm. It's been around for a long time. Very famous firm. You know, again, these are, you know, probably more focused towards architecture than planning, but with a lot of experience on this scale of project, especially higher density, medium, you know, sort of more urban, you know, projects. Treasure Island they're very well known at San Francisco, and you know, a number of others. With the 15-minute city was one of their concepts that I think was resonated well with the group. Here's their team. They've pulled fairly heavyweight planners and architects in from all over their organization for this project. They see it as being very important to the firm, as all three firms do. We had our first charrette already, and it was very good. I mean, it was like a half a day we spent with each of the firms. I just pulled a couple of things out from the first charrette. The first charrette was less about them presenting designs and plans and more about just sort of a kickoff. You know, we did as much talking as they did, getting them, you know, oriented into the project. We had a presentation of opportunities and constraints by Horrocks engineers, which was very good. And then we spent a couple of hours, the other half, sort of just workshopping and you know, have a very dynamic discussion. They have lots of questions, you know, and a lot of probing about the key vision elements and our interpretation of those. And it was good that we did have representatives from the working groups that are on the selection committee there to help field questions and ask questions. This is one of the boards from AECOM. It was quite interesting, actually, where they took the different key vision elements and created like a set of components and issues and questions to discuss. Perkins and Will, again, had some philosophical points to pursue in terms of how they, you know, all the components that integrate into a complex project like this. And SOM talked about, again, the 15-minute city concept, the idea being, of course, that everything you need is within a 15-minute, you know, walk, which is aspirational, but it's the direction that everybody's going these days, right? To try and reduce auto dependency and create healthier, more vibrant urban districts. And here they've shared some of their, you know, analytics of how they evaluate from a sustainability standpoint, you know, different schemes. So anyway, that's where we are. That's where they are now. Next week we have our second round of charrettes, where they'll be bringing back in, I think, a little bit more, some of the responses to, you know, to the plans. Should be very interesting, and we'll be happy to share with you those. Before I go into the next topic, are there any questions on that?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Okay.
Maybe this is for Alan too. What is these are high-end firms, and I get that, but what is the budget? Can you share with us a high and a low of what these contracts are going to be worth? This contract's going to be worth between X and X. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can. And we've got budgeted for planning and engineering about $675,000, as I recall. They're aware of that. Part of the scoring on these firms will be their proposed costs. So those that come in lower will get more points. We don't want cost to be the most important driver of this, because I think we want quality. But it's not a cheap process, and they're going to be putting in a lot of work. And I think Steve's going to talk about the scope of work and the things that we're going to be asking them to do over the next several months. But yeah, I kind of think in that $650,000 range. So it's a big deal.
Alan, this is Dave. Is that in the budget, or is that something that will move forward to the legislature this year?
That's in our budget, the budget that you passed last year.
Okay, that's what I assumed. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
And on that topic, you know, I can comment that, I mean, often when we've put out scopes of work, we give everybody a scope of work, and then they come back with usually very different budgets for achieving that. And then we have to look really closely at the scope to see if their response scope, to see if they've really included everything. In this case, we're giving them more of a maximum amount. And then we've given them a very aggressive scope, which I'm going to, you know, talk about here. And they, you know, to the extent, the thing we'll be watching for here is to the extent they take our scope that we've given them and seeing how they respond to that, to the degree of depth and detail and sophistication they respond to the components in the scope that we've given them. So instead of the variable being how much they charge, the variable will be how completely they respond to the scope. If you see what I mean, it's a kind of a reverse process, but I think a very valid one, and it'll be very interesting to see what they come back with. What I've done here is put together a couple of slides that walk us through the scope as we've now. Each of the teams did put together a methodology in their RFQ, but and we looked at that, and the methodologies were fairly similar. Now, there are certain things we want to make sure, though, that they do. And so we have developed our own scope of services that is a little bit more comprehensive than what some of theirs were. And so there's basically about 5 stages to this. And we have about a 6-month process. So think of this as being kind of a month per stage, if you will, with a milestone workshop kind of at the end of every stage. And we will be meeting with them in between these milestone workshops, but just from a staff standpoint. But in terms of really, getting stakeholders involved in these, that the milestone workshops become an opportunity for that. Anyway, the first stage will be just the site evaluation opportunities and constraints. I'm not going to read all these to you. You can kind of scan them. But you'll see that each stage has kind of 3 components. And the first one is very important. It's the key vision elements, which of course are the elements that we've already articulated in the working group document. And there's like, 6 or 7 sort of topics for those. And then there's a lot of detail under those topics. So, there's going to be a progression and of evolution of how they integrate those key vision elements into their framework planning. Then there's the actual pieces, the deliverables, for the each of these stages. The first stage being more, how do you understand the site? We're asking them for analogs, of other projects. We're asking them to come back to us with their site compilation, their site interpretation, and then the spatial modeling. That will evolve as well as we go through, and the spatial modeling occurs at 2 scales. One scale will be on the site itself, of evaluating different framework plan alternatives in terms of measuring the functionality using certain key performance indicators and metrics. And then there's also spatial modeling related to the surrounding area, the sub-region. There'll be a heavy emphasis on traffic and transportation related to that one, but also other things, and interconnectivity of trails, open space, stormwater, and land use as well. So that will be tracking through each as we evolve through the process. So the second stage is actually coming up with their first alternative concept framework. framework plans. And this is where, as I noted before, there would be differences in land use program and density and open space. And then those will be evaluated using, looking at to what extent are the key vision elements incorporated, and also the spatial comparative analysis. And then there'll be an economic evaluation, even at this early stage, where we've built into the scope where we will be doing a high level of cost analysis, and RCLCO will be doing a high level of revenue, and we'll actually have a look and use the economic performance as one of the metrics as we look at these three alternatives. Then we have stage 3 is, out of that stage 2, we'll pick a preferred direction at our milestone workshop based on the analytics and the economic analysis and other and satisfaction with key vision elements. Then we're going to actually then take that preferred alternative and do another set of alternatives, because there's always variations within the variations. And so that's stage 3, and then we'll evaluate the economics of that, and then that will lead us into our framework plan refinement. Well, we'll actually develop the different deliverables, the different components, the layers, if you will, of the plan. There's an urban design plan, a public realm plan, a transportation, sustainability, infrastructure, and then those will get back together. We'll again do another economic analysis, and that will be documented in our final stage, and that including guiding principles, the framework plan itself, a set of guidelines appropriate to where we are in the planning process, and some discussion of an implementation strategy. And that will take us through this planning effort. Again, we've got it trying to get done in about 6 months, and that will lead into a second level of planning, which will be what we call sector planning, which will be going down to the next level of detail for each of the sectors or districts. It could be different planners. It could be, by then, hopefully, we will have more information on key tenanting and corporations that would be a part of it, and they would be involved. So anyway, that's kind of where we are in terms of summarizing the scope of work that they have, and what they will do as they sort of finish the charrette process. In their last charrette presentation, they will also present their sort of response to our scope of work and any input they have, as well as their ability to achieve it within the budget maximum or less. Questions?
Any questions for Steve?
That was a lot to absorb, I know.
I'll tell you, your outline of the process is wow. It is in depth. It is comprehensive, and at least from what we've seen, very impressive. And to accomplish this within a 6-month time frame is pretty ambitious. We're glad that you're helping us, Steve.
Well, I will say, we have to report that several of the firms felt that was overly ambitious, and they felt it needed more time. But one of the variables in needing more time was really the degree that the public outreach process and the degree to which that would slow things down, and take weeks out of the schedule to go through an event and get back results and process those. And we think we've got a fairly streamlined outreach program identified, although they will be responding to that with their ideas. But that would be the one component that might stretch us out a little bit, if anything does.
Thank you. Any quick questions for Steve before we wrap up here? Thanks again, Steve, for your help today and your presentation. The last item on the agenda, we didn't leave us very much time, but is there any issue or any matter from the board that needs to be addressed with a comment or question? Go ahead, Jim.
Representative. So I mentioned this before, but we have proposed to the building board and will to the IGG committee meeting 2 projects, one for moving the fire management facility from the prison over to property that we own on 35th South and 5th West. And then also moving fleet and surplus over here by us in the Taylorsville State Office Building on the public safety driving range. I just mentioned that as we go through the process, it would be helpful to have some support. If we lay out the schedule right now, if those two projects are funded this year, they would be completed and those agencies would be able to move 1 year after the prison's available. So time is of the essence.
Good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. And again, Jim and April, but Jim, having you part of this process with your experience has been helpful. So thank you. Any other comments from the board? Not seeing hands or anyone speaking. Alan, you want to do a 30-second wrap up? Is there anything you need to say about what's coming, or do you think we've covered it?
I think we've covered the main points. There are a lot of moving pieces right now, and it's really fun to kind of see the different puzzle pieces that people are throwing on the table. And very soon we're going to have to figure out how to put all those pieces together. So got a lot of work ahead, but I really appreciate the tremendous support from everybody on this board and from our.
Thank you, Alan. We sure appreciate your leadership. If you look back at our today's agenda, the information that we've covered is significant. It is substantial. So I just want to express my appreciation to board members for being here and for your engagement. We really appreciate it. And to our guests, members of the public, for joining us, thank you. With that, I would entertain a final motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion. Jim Russell.
Thank you, Jim. Motion is to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I'll second that. This is Dawn.
Dawn, thank you for the second. All in favor say aye.
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 We stand adjourned. Thank you. Good night or good